Families grieving and frustrations growing as a deadly COVID-19 outbreak spreads through a Scarborough long-term care home.
These are our grandparents. It's a tragedy. If you don't suffocate the virus will suffocate us. This virus is unforgivable.
What healthcare workers and families of residents say needs to change, and
this is people's livelihoods, and they're hanging on by a thread.
The city's COVID-19 restrictions are fueling frustration and confusion, with several holiday markets grinding to a halt. And a wild and windy weather day. More on the dangers, the outages, and the thrill seekers taking on today's waves.
This is CBC Late Night News.
Good evening, I'm Marivelle Tarouk. A man is in life-threatening condition after being rescued from the water near Cherry Street and Martin Goodman Trail today. Police were called just after 3 p.m. They say about 6 kiteboarders were on the water and one of them was in distress. Officers performed life-saving measures on shore before sending the man on an emergency run to hospital. And thousands lost power today as those strong winds swept across the province. Ontario Provincial Police received dozens of reports for downed wires and trees, even roofs blowing away.
That roof up there has actually blown across the roadway over here, and it's ended up just down here, as you can see, right by the Esso gas station.
One Twitter user posted this scene near Yonge and Wellesley with the wind blowing boards around the area. Hydro One says about 104,000 customers across the province were without power at some point today. Areas in southwestern Ontario are the hardest hit. Crews are working as quickly as possible to get things back online. Police are asking anyone who can to stay home tonight for your safety and to allow crews to clean up the roads. There's Christina. Okay, I mean, we have to talk about those really strong winds and all of the wind gusts that took place in the province today, Christina.
Absolutely, Marivelle. We were talking about it the other night. The wind gusts peak in Toronto at over 90 kilometers per hour, but in St. Catharines, they peaked at over 140 kilometers per hour. Toronto, the Island Airport, at 118 kilometers per hour. But we are still going to be dealing with a gusty system. So let's take a look at this, because overnight those gusty winds are going to continue. Monday morning, we're still going to be dealing with those gusty winds. They're really going to start to subside and start to dissipate for your Monday evening. We're going to be dealing with another system. Before we get to that, though, let's take a closer look at the satellite and radar overnight, because we're looking at some precip overnight. Here comes in some rain, some light snow, and we're even dealing with some of that mixing you can see here right over London, Ontario. Let's take a closer look at what we can anticipate overnight for those of us who could be on the roads. So you're seeing here 1 a.m. that rainfall come in for Toronto. Hamilton pretty much remaining dry till about 3 a.m. But Kitchener, Barrie, and Oshawa, brace yourself. We are going to be dealing with some of that mixing. Now, when it comes to accumulation, that's going to be north, so pushing towards Newmarket and Barrie, and even north of the nation's capital. Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area, you could wake up to some flurries and be dealing with that for your Monday, but no accumulation. So relatively dry for your Monday. Toronto at 5 degrees. There are some of those flurries for Guelph and Orangeville. And when I see you once again for that long-range forecast, I'm going to let you know what's in store for the week ahead.
In the meantime, we'll think about caution for tonight in north of Toronto. Okay, we'll see you in a bit. Thanks, Christina. Okay. Well, another startling count today with 1,248 new cases of COVID-19 in the province. But even more disturbing, the numbers of new deaths, 29 of them across Ontario, 20 of those at long-term care homes. In Scarborough, 7 residents have died at Rockcliffe Care Community since an outbreak was declared at the home 2 weeks ago. It has since spread, with more than 80% of the home's residents currently infected. As Kelda Yoon reports, there are calls for the government to act immediately to prevent more deaths.
Flowers line the entrance to Rockcliffe Care Community in memory of the 7 residents who have died. Sienna Senior Living, which owns the home, says 144 residents and 66 staff members have been infected since the outbreak. Currently, there are 136 active COVID cases among residents.
No one in government, the public yes, but in government no, should be surprised.
Dr. Doris Greenspoon from the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario says the government should have learned from the first wave.
This country and this province has behaved in the most despicable way during the pandemic, first wave, and now second wave, with seniors in long-term care. We have seen not a penny on RNs, RPNs, nurse practitioners, PSWs.
Besides more staffing in long-term care homes, the association is calling on the province to immediately implement a 28-day lockdown in all red zones, with the exception of essential services and schools. Sienna Senior Living said Scarborough Health Network is assisting with staffing, with more than 30 team members redeployed to Rockcliffe. We spoke to someone whose dad is a resident at Rockcliffe and has been infected. He didn't want to be identified. He says staff are doing their best but lack experience in dealing with an outbreak of this magnitude. He wants the province to bring in the military.
At this point, that's one of the best option, right? So bring the military, and because this is way too much for the homes, because they don't have any experience, right? They need trained staff members who have experience or who have gone through this pandemic. Home mentioned that Red Cross offered to help, but we don't know if the home accepted or declined their help.
The Office of Ontario's Minister of Long-Term Care, Mary Lee Fullerton, who Dr. Greenspoon was particularly critical of, released a statement tonight saying, "We send our deepest condolences to everyone affected, residents, their families, and staff. After decades of neglect by successive governments, we are working hard to solve the long-standing and systemic challenges facing the long-term care sector." Fullerton's office said the government is also committed to providing an average 4 hours of direct care for each resident a day. That, though, won't come anytime soon. Kelda Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Healthcare workers say those staffing failures from the first wave of the pandemic still haven't been addressed and are leaving long-term care homes vulnerable.
We know that the workers overwhelmingly are women, have overwhelmingly not had full-time jobs. A lot of them rely on temporary work in multiple settings, and even though there have been limits put on working in multiple healthcare settings, they may work in grocery stores or take on other jobs to make ends meet.
A second urgent problem, 3- and 4-person rooms where infection control is harder to manage. Provincial governments are promising to do more. This as new concerns emerge. CBC News has learned of a new complaint to Ontario's Integrity Commissioner. It alleges government MPPs have received political donations from the long-term care lobby, creating a, quote, conflict of interest. For months, it's been clear that some groups in Canada are more vulnerable to COVID-19 than others. Right now, statistics indicate people of South Asian backgrounds form one of those groups. Magda Gabriselassie looks at why that's the case and how it might be remedied.
So here is our main home shrine.
During Diwali this weekend, the Patel family stayed safe, attending temple online.
We are missing our friends, but yes, with technology, we are good.
It was a different story at 2 outdoor events in Ontario this weekend, shut down by police. A scenario doctors behind a Toronto Star opinion piece were hoping to avoid by shedding light on the transmission of COVID-19 in the South Asian community. Zain Chagla is one of those doctors.
In Brampton and Peel region, we talk about 30% of the population being South Asian, but nearly 50% of the cases being South Asian.
He says it's happening across the country, so he calls on South Asian Canadians to protect the multi-generations living in one home and to avoid having guests and to realize they're at special risk.
This is a very forward-facing community, that there are a lot of public jobs and ones where people are getting repeated exposures.
This emergency room doctor also wants to address the lack of accessible information on COVID-19 safety measures.
So I think we need increased messaging in different languages.
So online, as part of the newly formed Seek COVID Task Force, her team is offering how-tos in English, Punjabi, and Hindi.
How to take precautions, how to isolate, how to take the screening test if you think you have symptoms and you think you need to get tested.
This head of a South Asian group wants to make sure that all this talk won't lead to blame.
You're blaming the victim of hardworking, tax-paying individuals who have been cheated of the resources that they need in order to combat disease and ill health in general, but this pandemic in particular.
He says long-term underfunding of public health has put racialized communities at risk, and that needs to be addressed. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Toronto.
2 people are dead and 1 injured after a vehicle crashed and caught fire on Saturday. It happened on Highway 427 near Highway 409. Toronto Fire says a vehicle crashed into a guardrail and went up in flames. Crews arrived on scene around 9 p.m. and put out the fire within minutes. 1 occupant, though, had to be extricated from the vehicle. 2 victims were pronounced dead at the scene. With Toronto now in the red control category, more and more events, including popular markets, are being cancelled. One indoor Christmas market in particular had to cancel its venue after just 24 hours notice from the city. Dahlia Ashry has the details.
You're not really telling me why I'm not allowed to operate, but I have been operating since June.
This was last year's Christmas market here at the Great Hall. It was set to open again today, but they were forced to close their doors, affecting 500 vendors. On Saturday, organizer Felicia LaPlume received an email from the city stating they received a complaint from the public and that market contravenes the city's new COVID restrictions. The email goes on to say your planned event is not permitted. In a statement to CBC, the city says the event organizers and the venue operator were both advised that the planned event would contravene the Section 22 order. That means the Christmas venue falls under the category of meeting and event spaces and must be closed. But LaPlume says under the provincial guidelines, they are considered a retail business.
A whole lot of gray area between both levels of government and people trying to figure out how does this apply to me, and further to that, how am I allowed to run my business and whom isn't?
I spoke to a first-time vendor who tells me she lost her job during the pandemic. She said she was looking forward to selling her pottery products at the markets, but unfortunately with the closure, she says she can't afford to take the next financial hit.
It's hard with the holidays coming around, you know, myself and I'm sure a lot of the other vendors were really hoping on the income of this sale.
Alcide is one of hundreds of other vendors affected by the closure. Her handcrafted ceramics now sitting unsold.
So this is a little bit of the stock that I had planned to sell today.
LaPlume says the markets have been complying with public health guidelines for months, and the new restrictions are unfair.
Why are malls still open when there are thousands of people packed into a mall? There's no temp checking, no contact tracing, no enforcement of social distancing. I would like to see the city step up and do their job, which is lead fairly for everybody.
Felicia LaPlume tells me she will continue to support vendors by hosting a virtual Christmas market that will be held from November 20th to December 20th. Dahlia Ashry, CBC News, Toronto.
I concede nothing. Those were Donald Trump's words after the U.S. president seemed to acknowledge Joe Biden's victory for the first time. Details after the break. A BC woman is fighting for her life after contracting COVID-19 while pregnant. Her baby was born via emergency C-section. She remains in an induced coma. Briar Stewart has the story.
For Dave McIntosh, the trip to this hospital is truly bittersweet. Inside, his wife is fighting for her life after another was welcomed into the world.
I was thrilled to find out that he was a healthy baby boy.
When she was 36 weeks pregnant, Jillian McIntosh gave birth to a baby boy, but she doesn't know it yet. Earlier this month, she started feeling ill. She thought it was because of her pregnancy, but she went to the hospital.
That's when they found she had pneumonia and had tested positive for COVID. They said she would just be in there hopefully a couple days while they checked her out, and then all of a sudden everything just went haywire.
His wife ended up on a ventilator and was given an emergency C-section. McIntosh couldn't hold his son until 36 hours later when his COVID test came back negative.
It was awesome. It was such a relief, without being able to go and see his mom and hold her hand or anything, to finally be able to go and see him after waiting and waiting.
McIntosh is hoping his son can come home this week. As for his wife, it's unclear. She's still in a coma and on a ventilator.
McIntosh says they don't know where his wife caught COVID-19. They were both wearing masks and taking all of the precautions. He said she wasn't going anywhere besides the daycare to pick up their 3-year-old daughter, and neither she nor McIntosh tested positive for the virus.
With the number of COVID cases rising, he says people need to realize that everyone is vulnerable. His family's experience is a cruel example of that. A nurse from the ICU told McIntosh that at one point his wife's eyes fluttered.
The nurse did mention to her, "Oh, you've got a beautiful, healthy baby son," but maybe she heard that. I don't know. I hope she did, but if not, she's got a big surprise for her when she wakes up. So.
And he says only after that will they officially name their son. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Abbotsford, BC.
Reaction was quick to pour in after it seemed Donald Trump had acknowledged Joe Biden's victory for the first time. But the U.S. president was quick to backpedal. Paul Hunter reports.
Still refusing to acknowledge defeat in this month's election, Donald Trump today went golfing, but not before he tweeted, seeming to suggest Biden had won, but as he put it, only because the election was rigged. Then seeming to backtrack anyway. "I concede nothing," he wrote. For the record, there remains no evidence the election was rigged. As the Biden team put it today,
Donald Trump's Twitter feed doesn't make Joe Biden president or not president. The American people did that. 4 more years.
Still, a day after Trump's hardcore supporters marched on Washington, themselves in turn supported by Trump himself, Biden's team underlined most Americans see it differently, and that the president's intransigence comes with a price. On files soon to confront Biden, not least the pandemic, Trump is also blocking Biden's team from briefings with government officials, a key part of the transition process.
Joe Biden's going to become president of the United States in the midst of an ongoing crisis. That has to be a seamless transition. Our experts need to talk to those people as soon as possible so nothing drops in this change of power we're going to have on January 20th.
Of course, it would be better if we could start working with them.
Anthony Fauci, lead scientist for the White House on the pandemic, today underlined the value of a smoother transition, especially now, while noting when it comes to official White House briefings on COVID.
The last time the president was physically at a task force meeting was several months ago.
Tonight, Trump remains focused on his unfounded allegations of voter fraud, despite most courts so far rejecting his legal challenges. As Joe Biden now tries to move forward, the country itself tonight still mired in political disarray. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
So any day where like September until probably December-ish, January, when the winds are pumping and we get some pretty good waves out here, it gets pretty busy.
Coming up, more from these brave souls taking on today's waves, and we ask what you're all thinking. Why? Stay with us. Today's wild weather made for some big waves along the shores of Lake Erie, and a group of surfers decided to seize the opportunity. We caught up with a few of them and asked how they braved the cold and the rain.
You got to make sure you have gloves, boots, a wetsuit so that you're not freezing. I wear the whole thing. This is a 5'4" wetsuit, so it keeps me super warm. We'll probably be here right till sunset. I learned in Australia when I came back home. I didn't know that surfing in the lake was even a thing. One of my friends had told me about it, and so I got into it probably about 2 years ago in Lake Erie, and it's like some of the best waves I've ever surfed. I've been surfing here for probably like 3 years. So any day where like September until probably December-ish, January, when the winds are pumping and we get some pretty good waves out here, it gets pretty busy.
It's kind of wild and woolly, as you can see. It really doesn't have the tidal-driven waves that the oceans do. It's all wind-driven, which is why it's pretty crazy, and that's the only conditions we kind of come out in. Instead of being big, long sets, they kind of come in fast and furious, and you just really have to be ready to go.
There's a huge community here on the Great Lakes. We have 3 amazing Great Lakes around us, and the community's been growing for, I would say, the past 10 years, and right now it's at an all-time high for people that are getting into the sport and enjoying what it has to offer. These Great Lake surfers, they're dedicated to the surf. Some guys are driving up to 4 or 5 hours just to find a swell and chase a storm that's been brewing.
Dedicated is definitely a word I would use to describe them, Christina.
Listen, Marivelle, I'm with you. What you said earlier before break, why? I don't know, but we are definitely the place to do that. We have become the Windy City. We've got to adopt this new title, and it's still going to be windy for our Monday morning. 4 degrees, Marivelle, so some sun and cloud, that mix. We did talk about some activity, but it looks like we're going to be seeing that for our Tuesday. So let's talk a little bit more about this wind. We could still be dealing with those shoreline flooding Sunday overnight into our Monday. So it is dangerous. You want to stay away from those regions, of course, if you're not a surfer, right? So you want to stay away from those regions if you can. So let's take a look at this long range forecast. That Colorado low that's been giving us all of this rain, snow, that mixing in the winds, that's pushing out to the Atlantic. In comes another low pressure system. We're going to start to see that Monday afternoon into our evening. And then for our Tuesday, all right, we've got some more activity. Here is that mixing, 3 degrees. Sun is going to peak out in Toronto, but we're going to be dealing with that mixing, a wintry mix of flurries and rain. Guelph, very similar. Mississauga as well. Burlington at 3 degrees. Pickering at 2 degrees. So we're looking at that wintry mix across the board. Let's stretch out Toronto for the next 7 days. So your Monday at 5 degrees. Feels like 0. It's going to feel a lot chillier. And then Tuesday, here's that wintry mix feeling like -2. Wednesday, Thursday, the sun comes out. Check out this warmth surge for your Thursday after a very cool Wednesday. And then Friday, return of that activity. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when we meet again, we're going to need that umbrella once more. And Barrie, as we push north, here's that activity a little earlier. So Monday and Tuesday, here are those flurries. Wednesday, here is that temperature dip. Thursday, warm again. And then by the time we meet again next week in Marivelle, you're going to need that umbrella. Have a great week until we see you again.
Thanks so much, Christina.
Thank you.
And that is our show for you tonight. Thank you for watching. We're going to leave you with a look at the Distillery District, which is all lit up now for the holidays. Have a great night, everyone.